My brother was smiling when he walked into the bank conference room because he thought the meeting was about me being removed from Dad's accounts. He had told everyone I was hysterical, greedy, and trying to control an old man's money. Then the fraud investigator placed 7 printed transfer records on the table, followed by 3 gift letters with Dad's signature at the bottom. The room went quiet before she even started reading. By the time she finished, my brother wasn't asking for my access to be cut anymore. He was asking whether he needed a lawyer. But to understand how he ended up trapped by the same paperwork he forged, I have to go back to the first morning I saw $4,800 leave my father's account with a memo that said, "Dad wanted me to have it." Before we go any further, thank you for being here. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from, because stories like this happen in quiet families more often than anyone wants to admit. A quick note before I start. Some identifying details have been changed for storytelling and privacy, but the emotions and the lesson at the heart of this are real. The first thing I want you to understand is that my brother did not look like a thief. That was part of the problem. Nikhil looked like the responsible son in every family photo. Pressed shirt. Nice watch. One hand on Dad's shoulder at birthdays. He had the kind of voice people trusted on the phone, warm in the first 10 seconds and confident by the 20th. I was the daughter who asked too many questions. That was the family shorthand for me. Priya asks questions. Priya wants receipts. Priya reads the instructions on the back of the form before she signs the front. When we were kids, it made everyone laugh. When we became adults, it annoyed people. And after Dad's health scare, it made me dangerous to my brother in a way I didn't understand yet. My father, Arun, was 78 when this started. He had been an accountant for a regional grocery chain for almost 30 years, which meant he was the man who still balanced his checkbook with a blue pen and wrote the date in the top right corner of every bill before paying it. He kept rubber bands around stacks of statements. He labeled file folders in block letters: gas, electric, insurance, property tax. After my mother died, the folders became more than paperwork. They were his way of keeping the house from feeling empty. Every Sunday afternoon, after lunch, he sat at the dining room table with tea, a calculator, and the little brass letter opener Mom had bought at a flea market. Sometimes he called me just to tell me he had found an error. $2.13, he'd say, like he had caught a burglar halfway through the window. "Dad, it's $2. Today, $2. Tomorrow, 20. That is how they get you." That was my father. Careful. Stubborn. Proud of being careful. So when money started moving out of his accounts without his knowledge, it did not start with a man who was careless. It started after a small stroke turned a careful man into someone who got tired in the middle of a sentence and forgot where he had put the kettle while it was still warm. The stroke happened on a Thursday in March. He was in his kitchen making toast when his left hand went weak. His neighbor, Mrs. D'Souza, saw the front door standing open and found him sitting on the floor beside the cabinets, embarrassed more than frightened. That was so like him that it still hurts to say. He apologized to the paramedics for wasting their time while one side of his mouth wasn't moving correctly. He was lucky. The doctors said it was minor. They used the word minor as if it could make the hospital smell less sharp, or the machines less real. He spent 4 nights in the stroke unit, then 2 weeks in rehab, then came home with a cane, a pill organizer, and a stack of discharge papers thick enough to make him angry. "They gave me homework," he said, tapping the physical therapy instructions with one finger. At my age. Nikhil came for the first weekend after Dad got home. He arrived with groceries, a new blood pressure cuff, and the expression of a man who expected applause for knowing which aisle the low-sodium soup was in. He lived 40 minutes away in a new subdivision with stone columns at the entrance. I lived 15 minutes from Dad, in a condo with a laundry room that 8 quarters, and I had been the one driving him to follow up appointments. Still, when Nikhil walked in carrying 2 canvas bags and saying, "Don't worry, Dad, I've got everything handled," Dad's face relaxed. That was the old pattern. Nikhil performed competence. I performed labor. The family called him helpful. At first, I was grateful. I really was. Caring for an elderly parent after a medical scare is not cinematic. It is phone calls with insurance portals. It is finding the right compression socks. It is arguing gently about shower chairs. It is making soup and then watching the person you love pretend they are not too tired to lift the spoon. So when my brother offered to help with Dad's online banking, I did not object. That sentence is one I replayed later more times than I can count. Dad had online access, technically. He also had a password written on a sticky note inside a cookbook, which defeated the point of the password and horrified every bank employee who ever heard about it. After the stroke, he struggled with two-factor authentication. He would get the code by text, then forget which screen to put it into. Sometimes the code expired while he was looking for his glasses. One Saturday in April, the three of us sat at Dad's dining room table. The table still had the plastic cover Mom had insisted on keeping even after the grandchildren got old enough not to spill juice. Nikhil had his laptop open. I had a notebook. Dad had tea. "We need a system," I said. "Bills, medical expenses, anything unusual. We should both be able to see what's happening." Nikhil clicked his tongue. "Priya, relax. He's not incompetent." Dad looked from him to me. "I am sitting right here." "That's not what I meant," I said. "I know what you meant." Dad's voice was dry. "Both of you are being annoying in different ways. Continue." Nikhil laughed too loudly. "All I'm saying is, we don't need to turn this into a corporate audit. Dad just needs someone to help him click the buttons." "Then both of us should have view access," I said. "Not control, just view access. You and your view access." He leaned back and rubbed his forehead. "Fine. Whatever makes everyone sleep at night." Dad signed the bank's convenience access forms the next week. That distinction matters. He did not sign a power of attorney giving either of us authority to gift money, move large amounts, or treat his accounts like a family drawer. The bank representative explained it clearly. We could help him manage routine transactions. Dad remained the owner. Dad's consent mattered. The woman at the branch, a patient assistant manager named Celia, said, "Any transfer should be at your direction, Mr. Rao. Your children can assist, but this is your money." Dad nodded. "Of course. I am not dead." Celia smiled because she didn't know him well enough yet to realize that was not a joke. The first few weeks were boring, which was exactly what I wanted. Mortgage on the small house, utilities, pharmacy, the visiting nurse copays, groceries. A check to the lawn guy because Dad refused to admit he couldn't mow anymore, but also refused to let the grass look neglected. I made a spreadsheet because I am who I am, and Nikhil made fun of the spreadsheet because he is who he is. "You color-coded the blood pressure cuff purchase," he said one evening when we were both at Dad's. "Medical equipment is blue. You need a hobby." "I have one. It's called preventing chaos." Dad watched us from his recliner. "Both of you inherited your mother's stubbornness and my talent for making it worse." Those were the last normal weeks. I didn't know it then. I thought we were settling into a new version of family life. Dad was slower, but still Dad. Nikhil was annoying, but still Nikhil. I was tired, but tired had become the background music of my life. Then came the transfer. It was the first Monday in May, 6:42 in the morning. I remember the time because my coffee hadn't brewed yet. I was standing barefoot in my kitchen, scrolling through Dad's bank app before work, mostly out of habit. The previous Friday's pharmacy charge had posted. The electric bill had cleared. Then I saw a transfer for $4,800. Recipient, N. Rao. Memo. Dad wanted me to have it. I stared at it for long enough that the screen dimmed. At first, my brain tried to make it ordinary. Maybe Nikhil had paid for something. Maybe Dad had reimbursed him. Maybe there was an invoice I hadn't seen. $4,800 was a lot of money, but not impossible. Dad had savings. Dad was generous. Nikhil had 2 kids in private school and a mortgage that made my stomach hurt to think about. So I did the reasonable thing. I called Dad. He answered on the 5th ring, sleepy and irritated. "Why are you calling at this hour?" "Dad, did you send Nikhil $4,800? Silence. Not a confused silence at first, a waking up silence. I heard sheets move. "What?" "There's a transfer from your checking account to Nikhil. $4,800. It says you wanted him to have it." "For what?" That was the first cold spot in my chest. I was going to ask you. "Maybe he bought something," Dad said, but his voice had already changed. It had gone careful, the way it did when he didn't want to admit he couldn't remember. "Did he talk to you about it?" "Maybe." He hated that word. Before the stroke, he would rather say nothing than maybe. "I don't know. I was tired yesterday. He came by. We talked about the gutters." "The gutters cost $4,800? Don't be sarcastic in the morning." "I'm not being sarcastic. I'm asking." He sighed. "Call your brother." So I did. Nikhil answered from his car. I could hear traffic and the little ping of his turn signal. "Hey, what's up? Did Dad transfer you $4,800? A pause. Short. Too short. The kind of pause a person uses to decide whether the truth will cost more than a lie. "Yeah," he said. He wanted to help with some expenses. "What expenses?" "Priya, come on." "What expenses, Nikhil?" "The kids' summer program, some house stuff." He offered. Dad doesn't remember offering. Dad doesn't remember what he had for lunch yesterday. That's why we're helping him. I gripped the counter. "Don't talk about him like that." "I'm not. I'm being realistic." He wanted to help. He felt bad that I've been doing so much. Doing so much. He said it with the smooth irritation of someone who had practiced being wounded. "Then why didn't you tell me?" "Because you're not Dad's accountant." That landed exactly where he meant it to land. I said, "Actually, the whole point of both of us having oversight was so nobody had to wonder about this." "Oversight," he repeated, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "Listen to yourself. He gave his son money. That's not a crime." "Did he initiate it?" "He wanted me to have it." There it was. The line. Calm, simple, almost bored. Dad wanted me to have it. At the time, it just made me angry. Later, it became the sentence that followed him into every room where he tried to explain himself. I asked him to send me whatever note or message showed Dad had approved the transfer. He laughed. "I'm not submitting receipts to my little sister." "Then send it to Dad. He doesn't remember." "He doesn't remember because he's old and recovering. Stop upsetting him." That was the moment I realized he wasn't going to explain the transfer. He was going to make the question itself look cruel. I went to Dad's house that afternoon. He was in the kitchen trying to open a jar of mango pickle with one hand and pretending he didn't need help. Mrs. D'Souza had left soup on the counter. The house smelled like cumin and laundry soap. "Did you talk to him?" Dad asked. "Yes." "And?" "He said you wanted him to have it." Dad looked down at the jar. His fingers tightened around the lid. "Maybe I said something." "Dad, don't use that voice." "What voice?" "The one that says I am now a project." I took the jar gently and opened it. He hated that too. We sat at the table. I opened my laptop and showed him the transfer. He put on his reading glasses. He leaned close. I watched his eyes move over the screen, and the longer he looked, the smaller he seemed. "I don't remember this," he said. "Okay. But maybe I forgot." "Okay. Do you think I'm losing my mind?" That question did something to me. It pulled all the anger out for a second and left only grief. "No," I said. "I think you had a stroke. I think you get tired. I think money shouldn't move out of your account unless you're clear about it." He nodded, but he didn't look relieved. That night, I added a new tab to my spreadsheet. I called it Unusual Transactions. I put in the date, amount, recipient, memo, and notes. One line, $4,800. Dad does not recall authorizing. Nikhil says gift. It felt dramatic when I typed it. Almost silly, like I was turning a family misunderstanding into evidence. I had no idea how important that first line would become. For the next 2 weeks, nothing else happened. That was almost worse. I started to doubt myself. Nikhil sent a text to the family group chat with a photo of Dad and his grandkids eating pizza. Dad looked happy. Nikhil's wife wrote, "So glad Papa is feeling better." My cousin Rena replied with heart emojis. I typed and deleted 3 different messages asking if anyone else thought it was strange that money had started moving around. I didn't send any of them. Families are good at teaching you which truths will make everyone uncomfortable. Sometimes you learn to swallow them before they reach your mouth. Then, on May 22nd, another transfer posted. $3,200. Same recipient. Same memo, except this time it said, "Gift from Dad." I called Dad at 8:11 in the morning. "Did you give Nikhil $3,200? He was more awake this time. "No." No hesitation, no maybe. "You're sure?" "Priya, I am old, not stupid. I did not give anyone $3,200 before breakfast." I almost laughed because he sounded like himself. Then he said, quieter, "Did he do it again?" Again? That word changed everything. The first transfer could have been confusion. The second made a pattern. And Dad knew it. I called Nikhil. He didn't answer. I texted him a screenshot and wrote, "Call me." He replied 20 minutes later, "Don't start. Dad knows." I wrote back. He says he didn't authorize it. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then, he forgets. I'm not doing this with you over text. That was the first time I saved a screenshot of a conversation with my brother. At lunch, I called the bank's customer service line. I did not use words like fraud yet. I said I had a concern about transfers from my elderly father's account. The representative was polite until I said I was not the account owner. Then she became polite in a different way, the way people become when they are building a wall, one sentence at a time. "We can discuss general procedures," she said, "but we can't disclose account details without the account holder." I understand. I'm on the account for convenience access. I see that you have authorized online view and bill management access. For any dispute, Mr. Rao would need to contact us directly or come into a branch. He had a stroke. I'm sorry to hear that. If you believe there is elder financial exploitation, we do have a fraud escalation process. Mr. Rao can also speak with our branch staff. Elder financial exploitation. The phrase sat in my ear after the call ended. It sounded too big for what was happening inside our family. It sounded like something on a pamphlet in a waiting room, not my brother moving money from Dad's account while Dad was learning to button his shirt with his left hand again. That evening, I drove to Dad's. Mrs. D'Souza was on her porch watering geraniums. She was in her 80s, tiny and blunt, with white hair pinned back and the moral authority of someone who had known our family since Nikhil and I were in school uniforms. "Your brother was here yesterday," she said before I reached the steps. He was. Around 4, he parked badly. Mrs. D'Souza noticed 2 kinds of things: emergencies and bad parking. Did Dad seem okay? She turned off the hose. Your father seemed tired. Your brother was speaking loudly, not yelling, loud in the way people are loud when they want witnesses to hear the nice parts. What did he say? Something about paperwork, something about helping with bills. Your father said, "Ask Priya." Your brother said, "Priya makes everything difficult." I felt heat crawl up my neck. You heard that? My window was open. I hear many things. People should remember windows. Inside, Dad was sitting at the dining room table with unopened mail in front of him. He looked exhausted. Nikhil came by? I asked. He rubbed his eyes. Yes. What did he want? He wanted me to sign something saying the money was a gift. The room went still around me. Did you sign it? No. I told him to come back when you were here. What did he say? Dad's mouth tightened. He said I was making him look like a criminal. There are sentences that open a door in your head. Behind that door is the version of a person you didn't want to believe existed. I had seen Nikhil be selfish. I had seen him take credit. I had seen him disappear when work got boring and reappear when people were thanking someone. But this was different. This was Dad, tired and frightened, being pushed to retroactively bless money he didn't remember giving. Dad, I said carefully, did he bring a letter? Yes. Where is it? Dad pointed to the trash can under the sink. I put on dish gloves because the trash had coffee grounds in it, and I pulled out a crumpled sheet of printer paper. It was damp on one corner. The heading said, "Gift Confirmation." Under that, in stiff, generic language, it stated that Arun Rao had voluntarily gifted $8,000 to his son, Nikhil Rao, for family support and home expenses, with no expectation of repayment. There was a signature line at the bottom, blank. I took a photo of it on the table before touching it again. Then I put it in a plastic sleeve from Dad's old tax folder. Dad watched me. You think he will try again? Yes. He looked toward the living room, where Mom's framed photo sat on the bookshelf. Your mother would be very angry. At him? At all of us. She hated paperwork on the dining table. I laughed then, but it came out wrong. That night, I didn't sleep much. I kept thinking about the letter. The blank signature line bothered me more than the transfers. Money could be explained, argued over, misunderstood. But a letter meant Nikhil knew there was something to justify. A letter meant he had moved from taking money to building a story about why taking it had been okay. The next morning, I went to the branch with Dad. He wore a gray cardigan even though it was warm, and he insisted on bringing his cane. Not because he needed it for the short walk from the parking lot, he said, but because people at banks respected canes. Celia, the assistant manager, recognized him. She took us into a small office with a glass wall and a fake plant in the corner. Dad sat down slowly. I placed the printed screenshots and the unsigned gift letter on the desk. I did not authorize these transfers, Dad said before Celia finished asking how she could help. His voice shook, but the sentence was clear. Celia's face changed. It didn't become dramatic. Bank employees are trained not to become dramatic. But her pen stopped moving. Mr. Rao, I want to make sure I understand. You're disputing 2 online transfers to your son? Yes. Did you share your login information with him? Dad looked at me. I said, he had authorized convenience access. Celia clicked through several screens. I see both children have access, but the transfers were initiated under Mr. Rao's primary online credentials, not the convenience profile. That sentence mattered. I didn't understand how much yet. Dad frowned. What does that mean? It means the system shows the transactions as if they were initiated using your username and password. I did not do that. Have you given your son your password? Dad's face flushed. It was in the cookbook. Celia's expression stayed professional, but I saw the tiny inhale. We changed Dad's password right there. We added stronger two-factor authentication. We put verbal warnings on the account. Celia said she would file an internal concern and have someone from the bank's fraud unit review the transfers. In the meantime, she said, Mr. Rao, if there are any attempts to pressure you into signing documents about gifts or transfers, please do not sign without independent advice. Dad straightened. My daughter already told me. Celia looked at me. Good. Keep copies of everything. Keep copies of everything. That became my religion for the next 5 months. I scanned the unsigned gift letter. I downloaded statements for March, April, and May. I exported transaction histories. I saved text messages. I wrote down dates when Nikhil visited Dad. I made notes after phone calls. Not dramatic notes, just facts. Tuesday, 7:15 p.m., Nikhil called. Said Dad was confused and I was overreacting. Wednesday, Dad said Nikhil asked again about signing a letter. Thursday, Mrs. D'Souza saw Nikhil leave with a manila envelope. At work, I closed my office door during lunch and learned words I never wanted to know. Vulnerable adult, undue influence, authorized user versus account owner, convenience signer, suspicious activity report, mandatory reporting. And here's where it gets important. I was not a lawyer. I was not a banker. I had no secret connection who could magically fix it. What I had was Dad's clear statement that he did not authorize the transfers, a bank employee who had taken the concern seriously, and a brother arrogant enough to keep creating paperwork because he thought paperwork made him look legitimate. Nikhil called me 3 days after the branch visit. What the hell did you do to Dad's account? I was in the parking lot outside a physical therapy clinic, waiting for Dad to finish his appointment. Rain was ticking against the windshield. We changed his password. You locked me out. You were never supposed to use his login. He gave it to me. He wrote it in a cookbook. That's not the same thing. Do you hear yourself? You're treating him like a child. I watched an older couple come out of the clinic under one umbrella. The man moved slowly. The woman matched his pace without making it obvious. No, I said. I'm treating him like someone whose money moved without his permission. Nikhil went quiet. Then he said, low and controlled, You need to stop. Stop what? This campaign. Dad wanted me to have it. He knows I have expenses. He knows I've been helping. You think because you live closer, you own him. Put it in writing, I said. What? If Dad wanted you to have it, put your explanation in writing and send it to the bank. He laughed once. You're insane. Then call Celia, explain it to her. I'm not talking to some branch clerk because my sister has control issues. There was the contempt. Not loud, not theatrical. Just honest for half a second. Dad came out of the clinic then, moving carefully, his therapist holding the door. I said, I have to go. Nikhil said, You don't want this fight, Priya. Trust me. I hung up. For the next month, he tried a different strategy. He became sweet. He sent Dad flowers from the grocery store with a card that said, Love you, Papa. He brought over biryani and told Dad he needed protein. He fixed the loose handle on the basement door, then texted me a photo of the screwdriver beside it as if he had rebuilt the house from studs. He called relatives, casually mentioning how worried he was that I was stressing Dad out. My Aunt Mina called me on a Sunday afternoon. Beta, she said, using the voice older relatives use when they are about to say something insulting but want credit for affection. Your brother says you are fighting about money. I was folding Dad's laundry in his bedroom. His socks were all black and somehow all different. I'm not fighting about money. I'm trying to find out why money left Dad's account. But Nikhil says your father gifted it. Dad says he didn't. Aunt Mina sighed. After a stroke, people become confused. You must be patient. Being patient doesn't mean letting thousands of dollars disappear. No one is disappearing anything. This is family. That phrase, this is family, it has excused more theft, cruelty, and silence than any legal loophole ever could. I said, family is exactly why it matters. She didn't like that. She told me not to make accusations I couldn't take back. I told her I hadn't accused him publicly. She said silence could be an accusation too. By the time we hung up, I was shaking so hard I had to sit on Dad's bed. Dad stood in the doorway. Who is that? Aunt Mina. Ah. He leaned on the cane. She always had too many opinions for someone who never brought dessert. I laughed, but my eyes burned. They're going to think I'm after your money, I said. Dad looked genuinely offended. What money? The man is stealing from a retired accountant with a 20-year-old Camry. If you are gold digging, you chose badly. That was Dad on a good day. Sharp enough to make a joke. Clear enough to see what was happening. But good days made the bad days harder, because confusion didn't arrive all at once. It came in patches. He could remember the name of the nurse who annoyed him in rehab but forget whether he had taken his evening pill. He could spot an incorrect insurance code and then ask me 3 times if I had called the plumber. Nikhil used those patches like handholds. In early June, a third transfer appeared. $6,500. This time the memo said, reimbursement and gift. I saw it at Dad's house, sitting at the dining room table while he watched a baseball game with the volume too low. My whole body went cold. Dad, I said, there's another one. He muted the TV. How? We changed the password. That was the question. The bank later explained that the transfer had been scheduled before the password change, set to process 2 weeks later. At the time, all I knew was that the money had moved again, and Dad looked like someone had reached into his pocket while he was sitting right there. Call him, Dad said. I don't think that's going to help. Call him. Put it on speaker. I called. Nikhil answered with, What now? Dad's face tightened. I said, You're on speaker with Dad. A pause. Then Nikhil's voice changed. Softer. Hey, Papa, how are you feeling? Dad said, Why did you take $6,500? No greeting, no warm-up. I didn't take it. You approved it. I did not. Dad, we talked about this. The house repairs, the kids, everything. You said you wanted to help. I said ask Priya about bills. No. You said, do not tell me what I said. For 1 second, I saw the father who had made teenage Nikhil sit at the kitchen table and explain a report card he had hidden under his mattress. Nikhil must have heard him too, because his voice sharpened. This is exactly what I'm talking about. Priya is making you paranoid. She wants control. She wants to be the only one with access. Dad's hand trembled against the arm of the chair. I want my money for my care, he said. You have plenty. That sentence hung in the room. You have plenty. Not, I didn't take it. Not, I misunderstood. Not, I'll return it. You have plenty. Dad looked at me then. I saw the hurt before he covered it with anger. Return it, he said. Nikhil exhaled loudly. I can't just move money around because Priya is having a panic attack. Return it. We'll talk when you're calmer. He hung up on our father. Dad stared at the phone in my hand. The baseball game kept moving silently on the TV. A player swung and missed. The crowd behind him stood with hands on their heads. Dad said, I want him off everything. That was the first off-ramp my brother drove past at full speed. Dad gave him a chance to fix it quietly. Return the money, step back. Let the bank sort the access. We could have kept it painful, but private. Nikhil chose war. The next day, he sent an email to me, Dad, Aunt Mina, 2 cousins, and his wife. The subject line was concern for Dad. I still have it. Priya has become increasingly aggressive about Dad's finances, he wrote. She has isolated him from family and is pressuring him to accuse me of things that are not true. Dad has always helped his children when he could. Now Priya is trying to rewrite that generosity as abuse because she wants exclusive control over his accounts and eventually his estate. Eventually, his estate. Dad's estate was a modest house, a retirement account meant to pay for his care, and a Camry with a dent in the rear bumper. But Nikhil understood something about family gossip. You don't need a big inheritance to make people suspicious. You just need the word estate. He attached a PDF. Gift confirmation. This one was signed. I opened it at my kitchen table, and for a few seconds I couldn't understand what I was seeing. The language was almost the same as the draft Dad had thrown away, but updated. It said Dad had voluntarily gifted $14,500 to Nikhil over several transactions. It said Dad was of sound mind. It said no repayment was expected. At the bottom was Dad's name in shaky handwriting. It looked like his signature. Not perfect. The A in Arin was too narrow. The R didn't hook the way his usually did. But if you had not seen Dad sign birthday cards for 38 years, you might believe it. I called Dad. Did you sign a letter for Nikhil? No. I'm sending you a picture. He took a long time to answer after I sent it. When he came back on the line, his voice was different. That is not mine. You're sure? Priya. Just my name. Hurt, angry, insulted. I'm sorry, I said. I had to ask. I know. I'm coming over. Bring my old tax returns. Why? Signatures, he said. If he wants paperwork, we will give him paperwork. That was the first time Dad sounded like a partner in the fight instead of the reason for it. I printed Nikhil's email. I printed the signed gift letter. I pulled Dad's tax returns from the file cabinet, along with old checks, passport renewal forms, and a notarized document from when Mom was alive. We laid them across the dining table. Dad put on his glasses. I made tea. Neither of us drank. His real signature had rhythm. Even when his hand shook after the stroke, it carried habits from decades of writing his name. The forged signature was careful in the wrong way. Slow. Drawn. Like someone copying a map instead of walking a road they knew. Dad touched the paper with one finger. Your brother never paid attention, he said. To what? My A always starts below the line. Your mother hated it. She said it looked like it was falling down. I looked. He was right. That tiny detail became another note in the spreadsheet. By then, the bank fraud unit had assigned an investigator named Lena Morris. She called me on a Wednesday afternoon while I was in the grocery store comparing sodium levels on soup cans, like my life depended on it. I stepped into the cereal aisle to hear her better. Ms. Rao, your father gave permission for us to speak with you as his support person. I want to go over what we're reviewing. Her voice was calm and low. Not warm exactly, but steady. After weeks of relatives implying I was greedy and Nikhil implying I was unstable, steady felt like oxygen. She asked for a timeline. She asked when Dad's stroke occurred. She asked who had access to his devices. She asked whether Dad had ever authorized gifts to Nikhil before. She asked about the letters. We have one unsigned draft Dad discarded, I said. And now a signed one my brother emailed to family. Dad says the signature isn't his. Please send both, Lena said. Can the bank even do anything about a forged letter that wasn't submitted to you? Maybe. Maybe not directly. But it shows context. And context matters. Context matters. I wrote that down too. Lena told me something else. The bank had access logs, device fingerprints, IP addresses, session times, transfer initiation details. Not magical spy movie stuff, just ordinary records created when people used online banking. If a transfer was initiated from a device or location inconsistent with Mr. Rao's normal use, she said, that helps us assess the claim. If it was scheduled in advance, that matters. If the login occurred shortly after a password reset or from a saved device, that matters. I leaned against a shelf of cereal boxes, trying to keep my breathing normal. Can you tell us what you found? Not yet. The review is ongoing. But I need you and your father to preserve everything. Emails, text messages, documents, notes. Don't edit anything. Don't forward altered screenshots. Originals are best. Okay. And Ms. Rao? Yes? If you believe your father is being pressured, you should also consider contacting Adult Protective Services. The bank can make its own report depending on findings, but families can report concerns too. There it was again. Adult Protective Services. A PS. I stood in the cereal aisle with a can of soup in one hand and felt the floor tilt. Reporting my brother to a bank was one thing. Reporting him to authorities was another. In my mind, APS meant neglect in houses with no heat. It meant strangers. It meant forms and interviews and maybe Dad feeling humiliated. It also meant someone outside the family might finally look at the facts without caring whether Nikhil had once been the charming boy at Diwali parties. I told Lena I would talk to Dad. That night, Dad and I sat in his living room. The lamp beside his chair made a warm circle on the carpet. Mom's photo watched us from the shelf. I explained APS as gently as I could. They investigate concerns about exploitation, I said. Not just physical care, financial abuse too. Dad stared at the muted TV. Abuse, he said. That's the word they use. For my son. I didn't answer. He turned the remote over in his hand. If we call them, people will know. Maybe. Your aunt will talk. Definitely. That got a small smile, but it disappeared. I don't want strangers thinking I cannot handle my life. I know. I don't want Nikhil in jail. There it was. The sentence people don't understand unless they've lived inside a family betrayal. You can be furious at someone and still not want the worst thing to happen to them. You can want money returned, access removed, safety restored, and still feel sick imagining handcuffs on a person whose baby photos are in your father's hallway. Calling APS doesn't decide the ending, I said. It starts a review. It creates a record. Dad closed his eyes. Your mother would say, start the record. She would. She would also say, your brother is an idiot. She would say that privately. No, Dad said. By now, publicly. The next morning, we called Adult Protective Services. The intake worker asked questions in a voice so neutral, it almost made me angry. Name, age, address, medical condition, alleged perpetrator, relationship, amounts, dates, current safety concerns. Did the vulnerable adult have food? Medication? Was there immediate danger? Did he consent to the report? Dad sat beside me, hands folded, jaw tight. When the worker asked, Mr. Rao, can you tell me in your own words what happened? Dad leaned toward the phone. My son moved money from my bank account. I did not give him permission. He made a letter with my signature. I did not sign it. I want my money protected for my care. The worker typed for a long time. Thank you, Mr. Rao, she said. I know that may have been difficult. Dad said, it was unpleasant, not difficult. There is a difference. After we hung up, he went to the kitchen and opened the refrigerator 3 times without taking anything out. That report changed the temperature of everything. 2 days later, the bank temporarily restricted online transfers from Dad's accounts pending review. Routine bills could still be paid through verified channels, but no external transfer could go out without additional approval. Lena called it a protective hold. Nikhil called it theft. He showed up at Dad's house the same evening. I was there, which he did not expect. Mrs. D'Souza later told me he had parked crooked again, half over the curb, like even the street owed him space. He came in without knocking because he still had a key. He stopped when he saw me at the dining table with Dad. "Of course," he said. Dad was in his chair. The cane was beside him. "You need to leave," I said. Nikhil ignored me and looked at Dad. "Did you freeze the accounts?" Dad said. "The bank is reviewing them." "Because of her." "Because money is missing." Nikhil's face hardened. He had always been handsome in a polished way, but anger made him look older, thinner around the mouth. "Money is not missing. You helped me. You said you wanted to help your grandchildren. Are you going to let her turn that into some ugly accusation?" Dad's hand moved toward the cane, not to stand, just to touch something solid. "I asked you to return it. I can't return money I used because you changed your mind." I said. "Then give us receipts. Show what it was for." He turned on me. "You don't get to interrogate me in my father's house. It's Dad's house. And Dad asked you to return the money. Dad doesn't know what you're making him ask." Dad flinched. It was small, but I saw it. Something in me went very quiet. "Say that again," I said. Nikhil looked at me. "What?" "Say again that Dad doesn't know what he's asking." He realized then that my phone was face down on the table between us. I was not recording. I wish I had been, but he thought I was. And for the first time all evening, he measured his words. "I'm saying he's vulnerable," Nikhil said. "And you're exploiting that." Dad stood up. It took effort. He pushed on the chair arms and got his feet under him. I started to move, but he lifted one finger and I stopped. "Get out," he said. Nikhil blinked. "Dad." "Get out of my house. Leave the key on the table. This is ridiculous." Key. Table. Now. For a second I thought Nikhil might refuse. Then he reached into his pocket, pulled the key from his ring with sharp little jerks, and dropped it on the table. It made a small sound. Not dramatic. Just metal on wood. At the door, he turned back. "You're going to regret this," he said to me. Dad answered before I could. "No," he said. "He is." That should have been the moment Nikhil understood. It wasn't. He was too committed to his own story by then. In his mind, he had become the son under attack by a controlling sister and an old man being manipulated. Every fact that didn't fit became proof that I was working harder against him. Over the next 3 weeks, he tried to cut my access. He called the bank and said I was misusing Dad's information. He went to a different branch with a copy of the signed gift letter and asked whether he could be made Dad's sole financial helper because I was creating distress. He emailed relatives again, this time saying I had forced Dad to make false reports. He suggested Dad needed a formal competency evaluation, which was rich coming from the person relying on Dad's supposed clear consent for thousands of dollars in gifts. And for a while, it worked socially. Aunt Mina stopped calling. My cousin Rena sent one text that said, "I don't want to get involved, but maybe think about whether this is worth tearing the family apart." Nikhil's wife unfriended me on Facebook, which would have been funny if I hadn't been running on 4 hours of sleep and fear. The worst call came from my cousin Sanjay. Sanjay and I had been close as kids. He was the one who taught me to ride a bike after Nikhil got bored and left me crying in the driveway. So when he called, I answered expecting at least a fair hearing. He said, "Priya, are you sure you're not overreacting?" I sat in my car outside Dad's cardiology appointment and closed my eyes. "Sanjay, there are unauthorized transfers and a forged letter." Allegedly forged. That word hit me like a slap. Dad says he didn't sign it. Dad also forgets things now. Not his own signature. Look, I'm not saying Nikhil handled it perfectly, but he says you were always worried about inheritance stuff. Inheritance stuff? Like after your mom died, he said you got weird about the house. I remembered exactly what he was twisting. After Mom died, Dad had wanted to add both our names to the house deed because he was scared. I had told him not to do that without talking to an estate attorney because it could create tax problems and family fights. Nikhil had rolled his eyes then, too. Responsible caution had become greed in his retelling. I said, "He is lying to you." Sanjay sighed. "Maybe everyone should sit down together. No banks, no government people, just family." That was an option before he forged Dad's signature. Priya. "No, don't Priya me. Dad's care costs are going up. He may need a home aide 3 days a week. That's not theoretical money. That's bathing, medication, transportation." Nikhil took money Dad needs to stay in his own house. There was a long silence. Then Sanjay said, "I didn't know about the aid." Because Nikhil didn't mention the part that made him look bad. He didn't apologize. Not then. He just said he had to go. That was the lowest point for me. Not the transfers. Not even the forged letter. It was sitting outside a medical building with Dad's appointment folder on the passenger seat, realizing that my brother had managed to turn the family into a jury while I was too busy keeping Dad alive to argue my case. Inside the cardiology office, the nurse handed me an estimate for additional monitoring and a medication change. Insurance would cover some of it, not all. Dad might also need a part-time aide if his balance didn't improve. The numbers were not catastrophic by themselves, but together they formed a wall. $22 an hour for a certified aide, 3 days a week, 4 hours a day. Plus transportation. Plus the bathroom grab bars Dad kept refusing until the occupational therapist used the phrase, "fall risk," in a tone even he couldn't ignore. That night, after Dad went to bed, I sat alone at his dining table and cried into my hands. Quietly, because his bedroom door was open. The spreadsheet was on my laptop. The numbers glowed on the screen. $4,800, $3,200, $6,500, $14,500 total. Then a separate column for projected care costs. The stolen money was not abstract. It was 10 weeks of home aid support. It was medication copays. It was the difference between Dad staying in his house and me trying to convince him that a facility with beige walls was actually very nice. I wanted to call Nikhil and scream. I wanted to email every relative every document I had with red circles and arrows. I wanted to stand on Aunt Mina's porch and read the bank statements out loud. Instead, I opened a new folder on my laptop and named it Dad Financial Protection. Then I made subfolders, statements, correspondence, gift letters, medical capacity, witness notes, bank fraud, a PS. It sounds small. It was not small. That folder was the place where panic became sequence. Sequence became proof. Proof became leverage. What Nikhil didn't know was that every time he tried to make me look hysterical, he gave me another dated item showing pressure, motive, and consciousness of guilt. Every email, every text, every family message performance. He thought volume made him believable. It actually made him traceable. Lena from the bank called again in late June. "We're expanding the review," she said. "There may be additional transactions." I was standing in Dad's laundry room, holding a fitted sheet like it had personally insulted me. "Additional?" "Smaller ones. We need your father to review statements back to January." My stomach dropped. I had only been watching closely since the stroke. January was before the stroke, before the hospital, before any formal convenience access. "How small?" I asked. "A few hundred here and there. Some person-to-person payments. Some transfers labeled reimbursement. I can't characterize them until Mr. Rao reviews them." Dad and I spent the next Saturday going through 6 months of statements line by line. It was one of the hardest days of my life, not because the work was complicated, but because I watched my father discover his trust had been leaking before either of us knew there was a hole. January 18th, $650 to Nikhil. Memo. Plumber. Dad frowned. My plumber is Mike. I paid Mike by check. February 2nd, $900. Memo. Kids. Dad's jaw tightened. I gave the children birthday checks, 200 each, not this. February 27th, $1,100. Memo. Help. No. March 6th, $750. Memo. Groceries. Dad gave me a look. Do I look like I eat $750 of groceries? By the end, the total was $18,900, including the 3 large transfers. Almost $19,000. Dad sat back in his chair and took off his glasses. I missed it, he said. He hid it in plain sight. I taught him how to balance a checkbook. That broke my heart more than anything. Not the money, the shame in his voice. The idea that being fooled by your own child meant you had failed some test. Dad, this is not your fault. He looked at the statements spread across the table. I know that in my head. Okay. My heart is less intelligent. I reached for his hand. He let me hold it for exactly 3 seconds, which was his limit for sentimental gestures. Then he said, add a column for whether I approved. So we did. For each transaction, Dad marked one of 3 things: authorized, not authorized, or unsure. The unsure column mattered because it made the rest stronger. We were not pretending Dad remembered everything. We were being careful. When he wasn't sure, we wrote unsure. When he remembered clearly, we wrote details. Plumber paid by check number 11442. Birthday checks mailed to grandchildren. Groceries delivered by market account, not Nikhil. Lena had asked for original statements, so I downloaded PDFs directly from the bank portal. I did not annotate those. I made copies for notes. I preserved email headers. I saved Nikhil's PDF attachment exactly as sent. This is the unglamorous part of revenge stories that people skip, but it is the part that makes the ending possible. I did not ruin my brother with a speech. I did not catch him because I was clever in one dramatic moment. I built a record so boring and complete that he couldn't talk his way around it. Meanwhile, APS assigned a caseworker named Mr. Alvarez. He visited Dad at home on a Tuesday morning. I offered to leave the room, but Dad asked me to stay for the beginning and then kicked me out halfway through because he wanted to prove he could answer questions without his daughter hovering. I sat on the porch with Mrs. D'Souza, who brought lemonade in 2 mismatched glasses. Government man? She asked. Caseworker. Good. Your brother needs government. Family did not work. That was Mrs. D'Souza, direct as a brick through a window. She told me more about Nikhil's visits, how he often arrived when he knew I was at work, how he would stand too close to Dad in the doorway, how she once heard Dad say, I don't want to talk about money today, and Nikhil respond, then stop making me come back. Would you be willing to tell the caseworker that? I asked. She looked offended. I already wrote it down. Dates also. I am old, not decorative. She went inside and came back with a small spiral notebook. On the front, in blue ink, she had written, Things I heard because people are loud. I still think about that notebook. Mr. Alvarez spoke with her after Dad. He also asked Dad's primary doctor for records, with Dad's consent. That mattered because Dad's condition was nuanced. He was not incompetent. He had mild cognitive impairment after the stroke, fatigue, and some short-term memory issues. He could make decisions, especially when rested and given time. He was also vulnerable to pressure, confusion, and manipulation, particularly around complex online tasks. That nuance became important later. Nikhil wanted 2 opposite things to be true. He wanted Dad competent enough to give him nearly $19,000 freely, but incompetent enough that Dad's denial didn't count. He wanted Dad's signature valid when it benefited him, and Dad's memory invalid when it didn't. The professionals noticed. In July, Nikhil escalated again. He hired a lawyer. At least, he had a lawyer send a letter. Whether he actually retained him for more than that, I don't know. The letter came by email and certified mail, which felt theatrical. It accused me of defamation, interference with familial relations, and financial manipulation of an elderly parent. It demanded that I cease making false claims to banks, government agencies, and relatives. It also demanded that I provide all passwords and financial records in my possession so Nikhil could resume assisting Dad. Resume assisting. I read the letter twice, then drove to Dad's house with a printed copy. He read the first page, snorted, and said, "This lawyer needs better hobbies." Dad. What? It is nonsense. It's still a lawyer letter. Then we answer with a lawyer. That was easier said than paid for, but Dad insisted. We used his money, with his permission, to consult an elder law attorney named Marianne Cho. Her office was on the second floor of a brick building above a dentist. The waiting room had too many magazines and one very aggressive fern. Marianne was in her 60s, with silver hair, red glasses, and the calm impatience of someone who had heard every family lie at least twice. She read the letter. She read the gift letters. She looked at the transaction spreadsheet. She asked Dad questions directly. "Mr. Rao, do you want your son Nikhil to have access to your accounts?" "No." "Do you want your daughter Priya to have access?" "For bills and records, yes. Not to buy shoes." Marianne looked at me over her glasses. I said, "Noted." "Do you believe you gifted Nikhil these amounts?" "No." "Did you sign this letter?" Dad leaned forward. "No, and the A is wrong." For the first time in weeks, I saw someone outside our family almost smile. Marianne explained options. We could formalize a limited durable power of attorney with Dad's consent, naming me for financial management and excluding gifts without specific written authorization. We could notify the bank formally. We could respond to Nikhil's lawyer with documentation and demand preservation of records. We could pursue civil recovery if the funds were not returned. The APS and bank investigations would proceed independently. And criminally? I asked. Dad looked at me. I wished I hadn't asked in front of him, but Marianne answered evenly. If authorities conclude there was exploitation, forgery, or theft involving a vulnerable adult, criminal exposure is possible. Whether charges are filed is not your decision. Your decision is whether to protect your father and preserve the facts. Dad was quiet on the drive home. At a red light, he said, "I don't know how to feel." "Me neither. He is my son." "I know. So are you. My daughter, I mean. English is stupid." I smiled despite myself. He looked out the window. "I keep thinking if your mother were here, he would not have tried this." "Maybe." "No. He would have tried something else. She would have caught him sooner." That was probably true. Marianne's response letter went out a week later. It was not emotional. It did not call Nikhil names. It stated that Dad denied authorizing the transfers, denied signing the gift confirmations, revoked any informal access, and demanded return of disputed funds pending investigation. It instructed Nikhil to preserve all communications, devices, bank records, drafts, metadata, and documents related to the transfers and alleged gifts. That last part mattered. Preserve all drafts. Nikhil, being Nikhil, could not resist responding. He emailed me directly, copying his lawyer, which I later learned lawyers hate. "This is harassment," he wrote. "Dad wanted me to have it. You can get as many outsiders involved as you want, but you can't change what he told me. You have poisoned him against his own son." I did not reply. Then he sent another email, not copying his lawyer. "You always hated that Dad trusted me more." I did not reply to that either. Instead, I forwarded both to Marianne and saved them in the folder. By August, the bank's protective hold had stopped any new transfers. Dad's bills were being paid from a clean process: pension deposits, verified bill pay, checks signed in person, and a new account for daily expenses with low limits. Marianne helped set up a neutral structure. A professional fiduciary service would review monthly statements. I would help Dad gather bills and attend appointments. No family member could make gifts or external transfers without written approval and a second review. Dad hated the idea of a professional fiduciary until Marianne said, "This protects Priya too." He looked at me. "From what?" "From being accused," I said. That was what convinced him. The fiduciary assigned to Dad was a woman named Carol, who wore navy suits and had the energy of a high school principal who could smell a fake hall pass from 30 feet away. At our first meeting, she asked Dad what his goals were. He said, "To stay in my house and not have my children behave like idiots." Carol wrote something down. "I can help with the first," she said. Dad liked her immediately. The new arrangement gave me something I hadn't had in months: breathing room. Nikhil could no longer claim I was angling for control because I had deliberately put a neutral person between myself and Dad's money. That did not stop him from trying, but it made the claim weaker. He shifted tactics again. He started telling people Dad had always promised him help with his mortgage because he had children and I did not. He said Mom would have wanted the grandchildren supported. He said I was punishing his kids. He said I was jealous because I had chosen a smaller life. A smaller life. That one hurt more than I expected. I had chosen not to have children. I had chosen a job that paid enough, but did not make me rich. I had chosen to live near Dad after Mom died because someone needed to be there when the roof leaked, or the pharmacy changed suppliers, or Dad pretended the check engine light was decorative. A smaller life was one way to describe it. Another was a life that made other people's larger lives possible. I didn't defend myself publicly, not because I was noble, because Marianne told me not to litigate in the family group chat. "Let the record speak," she said. I wanted the record to speak faster. Records, unfortunately, speak in institutional time. The bank fraud review moved slowly. A PS moved slowly. Marianne moved at lawyer speed, which meant efficient but never instant. Meanwhile, Dad's care needs kept changing. He had good weeks and bad weeks. He fell once in the hallway and bruised his hip. He tried to hide it from me until Mrs. D'Souza called and said, "Your father is walking like a man in a silent movie. Come here." We hired the homemaid 3 mornings a week. Her name was Tasha, and Dad pretended to resent her until she reorganized his spice cabinet and told him his turmeric was old enough to vote. After that, he respected her. The money Nikhil took would have paid for Tasha for months. Every invoice reminded me. In September, Lena called and asked if Dad would come to the bank for a formal meeting. She said the fraud unit had preliminary findings and wanted to discuss next steps. She also said, very carefully, that Nikhil had contacted the bank through counsel and requested a chance to provide documentation supporting the transfers. "Does Dad have to be in the same room as him?" I asked. "Not if he doesn't want to." Dad surprised me. He wanted the meeting. "I want to look at him," he said. "You don't have to prove anything." "I know, I want to look at him." Marianne advised that she attend. Carol, the fiduciary, also came for part of it. A PS could not share everything, but Mr. Alvarez had provided Dad with a letter confirming there was an active protective services investigation into alleged financial exploitation and recommending safeguards. The meeting was scheduled for a Thursday at 10 a.m. at the main branch downtown, not Dad's neighborhood branch. That mattered because Nikhil couldn't play familiar son at a place where people knew Dad from depositing birthday checks. The main branch had glass offices, gray carpet, and a conference room with a long table that made everyone sit too far apart. I barely slept the night before. I kept thinking about the hook of this whole nightmare, though I wouldn't have called it that then. My brother walking into a room confident that his story would win because it had always won. Nikhil had spent his entire life being believed first and questioned later. He had mistaken that for proof he was telling the truth. Dad wore a navy sweater over a collared shirt. He looked tired but neat. He insisted on shaving. I drove. Marianne met us in the lobby with a leather folder. Carol arrived with a notepad and the expression of someone who considered nonsense a personal inconvenience. Nikhil came in 2 minutes late. Of course he did. He wore a charcoal suit and no tie, the exact outfit men wear when they want to look serious but not scared. His lawyer was with him, a younger man than Marianne carrying a slim briefcase. Nikhil kissed Dad on the cheek before anyone could stop him. Dad did not move. "Papa," Nikhil said softly. Dad looked straight ahead. That was the first crack. Lena Morris entered with another bank employee I hadn't met, a fraud operations manager named David Chen. Lena looked exactly like her phone voice. Composed, practical, impossible to rush. She had a stack of documents in front of her, clipped into sections: transfer records, access logs, correspondence, disputed documents. She began with ground rules. "This is not a court proceeding," she said. "The bank is here to discuss account security, disputed transactions, and protective actions. We will not resolve family inheritance issues. We will not mediate emotional disputes. We will review records." Nikhil's lawyer nodded. Marianne nodded. I kept my hands in my lap. Lena turned to Dad. "Mr. Rao, do you understand why we're here?" Dad said, "My money was moved without my permission." "And do you consent to Ms. Priya Rao, Ms. Cho, and Ms. Whitaker being present?" "Yes." She turned to Nikhil. "Mr. Nikhil Rao, you provided documents asserting these transfers were gifts. Is that correct?" Nikhil sat forward. "Yes. My father wanted to help me. This has been blown out of proportion." His voice had that same warmth from phone calls. He sounded reasonable. Hurt, even. If you didn't know better, you might have believed he was the son dragged into an ugly room by a suspicious sister. Lena placed the first page on the table. "Let's start with the transfers." She slid copies to the attorneys. I could see the top page from where I sat. January 18th, $650. February 2nd, $900. February 27th, $1,100. March 6th, $750. May 5th, $4,800. May 22nd, $3,200. June 9th, $6,500. Total, $17,900. I blinked. Our spreadsheet had $18,900 because we had included one charge the bank apparently categorized differently. Even in that moment, part of my brain made a note to reconcile the discrepancy later. Trauma with admin skills is still admin. Lena said, "Mr. Rao disputes authorization of these transfers. Mr. Nikhil Rao, your position is that these were gifts or reimbursements authorized by your father." "Correct," Nikhil said. "Can you explain the January plumber reimbursement?" Nikhil glanced at his lawyer. "I helped with house maintenance." Dad said, "No." Lena looked at Dad. "Mr. Rao, please let us go one at a time. You'll have a chance to respond." Dad pressed his lips together. Lena continued. "The January transfer memo says plumber. We have a copy of check number 1142, written by Mr. Arun Rao to Mike's Plumbing for the same week. Mr. Nikhil Rao, do you have an invoice showing you paid a plumber?" Nikhil's jaw moved. "Not with me." "Did you provide one to the bank?" "No." She moved to the February transfer. Kids. Nikhil said Dad wanted to help with school costs. Lena asked whether there was a written request. No. Whether Dad had made similar transfers before. No. whether the grandchildren had also received birthday checks that month. Yes, Dad had copies. It went like that for each small transfer. Calm, specific, brutal in its plainness. Then Lena reached May. For the $4,800 transfer on May 5th, you stated in your written explanation that your father initiated the transfer after discussing your household expenses. Yes, Nikhil said. We talked that weekend. The online session that initiated the transfer occurred at 11:38 p.m. on May 4th. The device fingerprint matches a laptop previously used for your personal online banking profile with this institution. The IP address resolves near your residence, not Mr. Arun Rao's residence. Can you explain that? The room changed. It wasn't dramatic. No one gasped. No one stood up. But the air tightened. Nikhil looked at his lawyer. His lawyer looked at the page like he wished it were in a different language. I may have helped him, Nikhil said. Lena said, From your house? At 11:38 p.m.? He could have called me? Dad said, I was asleep. Lena made a note. She moved to May 22nd, the $3,200 transfer, initiated from the same device cluster. June 9th, scheduled before the password change, processed later. Same device cluster. Same IP range. My brother's face had gone still. I had seen that expression when we were kids, and Dad found the broken garage window. Nikhil had been holding the tennis racket. I had been holding nothing. He had looked at the glass, then at Dad. And you could almost watch him calculating whether there was any version of the story where gravity had done it. Lena then placed the gift letters on the table. 3 of them. I knew about 2. The unsigned draft from Dad's trash, and the signed PDF Nikhil had emailed. The 3rd one was new to me. Lena said, The bank received a gift confirmation uploaded through the secure message portal on June 12th. It was submitted from Mr. Nikhil Rao's email address as supporting documentation after the account restrictions began. I looked at Nikhil. He did not look at me. Dad whispered, He sent it to the bank. That tiny whisper did more damage than a shout would have. Lena continued, Mr. Arun Rao denies signing this document. He also provided samples of his signature. We are not handwriting experts, and the bank is not making a forensic handwriting determination here. However, we are considering the document in context with the transaction records, access logs, and Mr. Rao's statements. Nikhil's lawyer said, My client maintains the document reflects his father's intent. Marianne said, Reflects is doing a lot of work in that sentence. Carol coughed once into her hand. It might have been a laugh. I will never know. Lena looked at the first letter. I'm going to read the relevant line for the record of this meeting. I, Arun Rao, being of sound mind, voluntarily gift these funds to my son Nikhil Rao because I want him to have it. Dad closed his eyes. There it was. Not exactly the memo, but close enough. I want him to have it. Dad wanted me to have it. The sentence Nikhil had used like a shield. Lena placed the letter down. Mr. Nikhil Rao. This letter was created after the first disputed transfer. Metadata from the PDF you uploaded indicates the file was generated on May 23rd, the day after the second disputed transfer, using a document author name associated with your home computer. Can you explain why a letter confirming gifts dating back to January was created only after your sister questioned the transfers? Nikhil's mouth opened. Nothing came out. His lawyer touched his sleeve. We may need a moment, the lawyer said. But Lena wasn't finished. She turned another page. The unsigned draft provided by Mr. Arun Rao appears substantially similar to the uploaded signed version, including the phrase, with no expectation of repayment, and the same formatting error in the 3rd paragraph. The unsigned draft was recovered from Mr. Rao's home after Mr. Nikhil Rao allegedly asked him to sign it. Mr. Rao says he refused. Mr. Nikhil Rao, did you prepare the unsigned draft? Silence. This is the part people imagine as satisfying in a loud way. They imagine the villain yelling, the hero delivering a perfect line, everyone clapping. It was not like that. It was quiet. The hum of the air conditioner. The faint click of David Chen's pen. Dad breathing through his nose. My brother staring at the table. Nikhil finally said, "Dad and I discussed it." Lena said, "That wasn't my question. Did you prepare the unsigned draft?" I helped put his wishes into words. Dad opened his eyes. "No," he said. Everyone looked at him. He sat forward. His left hand trembled slightly on the table, but his voice was steady. "Do not put your theft in my mouth." Nikhil's face changed, not anger first. Recognition, because he had heard Dad's work voice. The old one, the accountant voice, the father voice. The voice that meant the numbers had been checked and the excuse had failed. "Papa," he said. Dad shook his head once. "You said I wanted you to have it. You wrote that. You told everyone that. But you never asked what I wanted. You asked what you could take." Nikhil looked around the table then, and I watched him understand that the room was not arranged the way he thought it was. He had walked in expecting a family argument with bank stationery. He had expected me to look emotional, Dad to look confused, and himself to look like the reasonable son. Instead, every institution in the room had brought paper. The bank had logs. A PS had a case. Marianne had Dad's revocation and demand letter. Carol had the neutral fiduciary plan. Mrs. D'Souza's notes were in the file, even though she wasn't in the room. And Nikhil had gift letters that told on him. He swallowed. "This is being twisted," he said, but his voice had lost its shape. Lena said, "The bank's preliminary finding is that the disputed online transfers were not properly authorized by Mr. Arun Rao. We are maintaining restrictions, removing Mr. Nikhil Rao's access, and referring the matter for further review. We will also cooperate with Adult Protective Services and any law enforcement inquiry." Nikhil's head snapped up. "Law enforcement?" David Chen spoke for the first time. "Financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult can trigger mandatory reporting and criminal investigation. The bank does not decide charges. We preserve and provide records when legally requested." Nikhil looked at his lawyer again. This time the lawyer did not rescue him. He said quietly, "Don't answer anything else right now." That was when my brother finally asked the question from the hook. "Do I need a lawyer for this?" Marianne looked at his lawyer sitting beside him. No one said anything. The silence answered. I wish I could say I felt triumphant. I didn't. I felt hollow. My hands were cold. Dad looked older than he had that morning. The person across the table was still my brother. He had stolen from our father. He had lied about me. He had forged a signature. He had tried to turn a vulnerable man's confusion into a permission slip. And still, some stupid childhood part of me remembered him teaching me how to whistle through my teeth in the backyard. Revenge, when it's real, doesn't feel like fireworks. It feels like a door closing that should have been closed sooner. The meeting ended with instructions. Nikhil's access was revoked. The accounts would remain protected. Dad would receive paperwork for disputed transaction claims. The bank would issue provisional credits where applicable after review, though recovery from Nikhil would be separate. The matter would be referred to the appropriate internal and external channels. Nikhil stood up too fast. His chair legs scraped the carpet. Dad stayed seated. Nikhil looked at him. "Papa, please." Dad's face folded for half a second. Then he said, "Return the money. Tell the truth. Then we can discuss, please." Nikhil's eyes moved to me. I did not speak. That was the only power I had left, and I used it. Silence. He left with his lawyer. Through the glass wall, I watched them stop near the elevators. Nikhil was talking fast. one hand cutting the air. The lawyer was shaking his head. For once, my brother had found a room where charm was not accepted as currency. The next few weeks were a blur of forms: bank affidavits, APS follow-ups, attorney emails, copies of Dad's ID statements verifying which transactions were disputed. A police detective eventually called. Her name was Detective Harrell, and she had the tired voice of someone who had learned exactly how ugly families could be around money. She interviewed Dad in person, with Marianne present. She interviewed me separately. She spoke to Mrs. D'Souza. She requested bank records through proper channels. She asked about Dad's capacity, Nikhil's access, the letters, the pressure visits, and the family emails. "Did your brother believe he was entitled to the money?" she asked me. We were sitting in a small interview room at the police station, not an interrogation room like on TV. Just a beige office with a table and a box of tissues that made me feel accused by its presence. "Yes," I said. "I think he believed Dad having money he needed was unfair if Nikhil wanted it. That's not the same as authorization." "I know." She nodded. "So does he, probably." That was the thing. Nikhil knew. The letters proved he knew. If he had genuinely believed Dad had gifted the money, he would not have needed to create documents after the fact. He would not have tried to get Dad to sign a confirmation after being questioned. He would not have uploaded a letter created on his own computer to the bank. He would not have told relatives I was after the estate before anyone had accused him publicly. He knew enough to cover himself. He just thought the cover would work. In October, Marianne filed a civil demand for repayment. $17,900 in disputed transfers identified by the bank, plus attorney fees and costs where recoverable. She also preserved Dad's right to pursue the additional $1,000 item separately if documentation supported it. The demand letter was clear. Repay within 30 days or face civil action for conversion, unjust enrichment, and exploitation-related claims. Nikhil did not pay within 30 days. Instead, through a new attorney, he offered $3,000 to resolve family misunderstandings with no admission of wrongdoing. Dad read the offer at the dining table. "$3,000, he said. He stole a car and offered to return the floor mats." Marianne filed suit. I won't pretend the lawsuit was fun. It was expensive, slow, and emotionally disgusting. But it also did something important. It forced Nikhil to produce documents, bank statements, communications, drafts, device information. His claims had to leave the fog of family gossip and enter the world of dates. Discovery is a beautiful word when someone has been lying with confidence. We learned that Nikhil had credit card debt he had hidden from his wife. We learned that 2 of the transfers from Dad's account went directly to payments on a home equity line. We learned that 1 transfer went to a private school deposit the same day he told me it was for home repairs. We learned he had searched online for phrases like gift letter, family loan, and elderly parent gifting money taxes. No single fact was the whole case. Together, they formed a net. The criminal side moved more quietly. For months, we heard almost nothing. Then Detective Harrell called Dad and said the case had been referred to the prosecutor for review. Potential charges included exploitation of a vulnerable adult, theft, and forgery-related counts. Potential. Not guaranteed, but real. Dad hung up and sat still for a long time. I said, "Are you okay?" "No." "Do you want tea?" "Yes, but that will not fix it." "I know." He looked toward Mom's photo. A parent spends years teaching a child not to steal. Then the child steals from the parent. There should be a different word for that. I didn't have one. The civil case settled before trial. That sounds anticlimactic, but the settlement conference was its own kind of reckoning. It happened in January, almost a year after the first small transfers, and 8 months after I saw the $4,800 memo. We were in a courthouse mediation suite with bad coffee and separate rooms. Dad, Marianne, Carol, and I sat in one room. Nikhil and his attorney sat in another. A retired judge moved between us, carrying numbers and reality. Nikhil started with denial, then minimization, then family hardship, then Dad's alleged generosity, then the claim that repayment would harm his children, as if Dad's medication and home care were paid in monopoly money. The mediator, Judge Ellis, was a small woman with white hair and no patience for fog. After one trip to Nikhil's room, she came back, closed the door, and said, "He is not enjoying the evidence." Dad said, "Good." Marianne gave him a look. Dad said, "What? I am elderly, not holy." By late afternoon, Nikhil agreed to repay the full $17,900 identified in the bank's fraud findings, plus a portion of Dad's legal fees. The repayment would come in a lump sum from a retirement account loan and a payment plan secured by a confession of judgment if he defaulted. He would also permanently waive any access to Dad's accounts, any role as fiduciary, and any claim that prior transfers were gifts. The settlement did not stop the criminal process. That was written plainly. Then came the part no one had warned me about. The mediator asked whether Dad wanted a joint closing session so the terms could be confirmed with everyone present. Marianne advised against unnecessary contact. Dad said, "I want him to hear me once." So we sat in the same room again. Nikhil looked awful, not destroyed, not movie villain ruined, just smaller. His suit didn't fit the way it had at the bank. His face had a gray undertone. He avoided Dad's eyes until Judge Ellis asked him to confirm the terms. "You agree to repay $17,900, she said. "Yes." "You agree these funds were disputed and that you will make no further claim that Mr. Rao authorized gifts represented by the letters in question." His throat moved. "Yes." "You agree to have no access to Mr. Rao's financial accounts." "Yes." "You understand this settlement does not bind any criminal authority." A longer pause. "Yes." Then Dad spoke. "Nikhil." My brother looked at him. Dad's hands were folded on the table. The tremor was there, but small. "You kept saying I wanted you to have it." Nikhil's eyes flicked to me, then back to Dad. Dad said, "This is what I want. I want my money for my care. I want your sister left alone. I want you to stop using my love as permission." No one moved. That was the understanding moment. Not the bank meeting. Not really. The bank meeting was when Nikhil realized the paperwork had trapped him. The mediation room was when he had to hear why it mattered from the person he had tried to erase from the story. His face did something I still can't fully describe. It didn't crumble. Nikhil was too proud for that. But the performance fell away. For a second, I saw panic, shame, anger, and calculation all fight for the same space. He wanted to argue. He wanted to say Dad had offered. He wanted to say I had twisted things. He wanted to reach for the old line. Dad wanted me to have it. But Dad was sitting right there, clear-eyed, saying what he wanted. There was nowhere for the line to go. Nikhil looked down at the settlement papers. "I was under pressure," he said. Dad's voice stayed calm. "So was I. You became part of it." That landed harder than anger would have. Nikhil did not apologize. Not really. He said, "I'm sorry it got this far," which is what people say when they are sorry consequences arrived. Dad did not accept it or reject it. He simply nodded once, like a clerk acknowledging receipt. 2 weeks later, the first repayment cleared. I know because Carol emailed a monthly summary with the subject line "Rao account update," and for the first time in almost a year, the numbers moved in the right direction. Dad printed the email and put it in his file cabinet under banking. Old habits. The criminal charges came in March. Exploitation of a vulnerable adult. theft by unauthorized taking, forgery-related charge tied to the gift letter submission. The exact legal names were longer, but those were the words that mattered. Nikhil was not dragged away in handcuffs from a holiday dinner. He received notice through his attorney and appeared for arraignment in a courtroom with fluorescent lights and wooden benches polished by decades of other people's bad decisions. Dad chose not to attend the first hearing. I went with Marianne, partly because someone needed to know what happened, and partly because I needed to see the process with my own eyes. Nikhil stood beside his criminal defense attorney in a dark suit. He looked straight ahead. His wife sat 2 rows behind him, not near me. When the judge read the charges, Nikhil's shoulders rose slightly and stayed there. The prosecutor mentioned the bank's records, the forged gift confirmations, the victim's vulnerability after a stroke, and the civil repayment agreement. Nikhil's attorney entered not guilty pleas. Conditions were set. No contact with Dad except through counsel. No access to his accounts. No harassment of witnesses. Witnesses. That word included me. Outside the courtroom, Nikhil saw me near the elevators. For a second, the old reflex moved across his face, the brotherly smile, the one that used to make teachers forgive late homework and relatives forgive missed obligations. Then he remembered where he was. He looked away. I did not follow. I did not speak. I went home and took Dad to physical therapy. The case eventually resolved with a plea to exploitation and a reduced forgery-related count. He received probation, restitution terms that mirrored what he had already begun paying, community service, and a criminal record he could not explain away as family drama. He also had to complete a financial ethics course, which Dad found so ironic that he laughed for a full minute and then had to sit down. "Financial ethics," Dad said, wiping his eyes. "Your mother would have framed the certificate." The family fallout was quieter than I expected. Aunt Mina called Dad after the charges became public record. I don't know exactly what she said. I only heard Dad's side. "Yes," he said. Then, "No, Priya did not make the prosecutor do anything. She is annoying, not magical." Then, after a long pause, "You should have asked me before you believed him." He hung up and looked at me. She cried. "Do you feel bad?" "A little. Not enough to call back." Sanjay apologized properly. He came over with groceries and stood awkwardly in Dad's kitchen while I put milk in the fridge. "I should have listened," he said. "Yes." He nodded. "I don't have a defense." That helped more than excuses would have. Mrs. D'Souza became a legend in the family after people learned about her notebook. Dad told everyone she had better surveillance than the bank. She pretended to be annoyed, but I saw her smile when Tasha called her the neighborhood auditor. As for Nikhil, his life did not end. That is important to say. Revenge stories sometimes make it sound like consequences turn villains into dust. Real consequences are more practical and more humiliating. He had to refinance debt. He and his wife sold 1 car. His kids changed schools the next year, which he blamed on family legal expenses until his wife apparently told him to stop saying that out loud. He lost a promotion at work after the background issue surfaced during an internal review. He was not homeless. He was not ruined beyond repair. He was made accountable. That was enough. Dad stayed in his house. The neutral fiduciary arrangement remained. Carol reviewed monthly statements. I still helped with appointments and paperwork, but every dollar had a second set of eyes on it. That protected Dad, and it protected me from becoming the next family story someone could twist. The first time Carol caught a normal mistake, Dad acted like she had solved a bank robbery. A pharmacy charge posted twice, once on a Friday and once the following Monday. It was only $38.42, the kind of amount that would have vanished inside the old mess, but Carol flagged it and called me before lunch. I took the printed statement to Dad. He put on his glasses, checked the dates, and reached for his blue pen. "Duplicate," he said. "Looks like it. Not fraud, just incompetence." "Probably." He circled both charges with the careful satisfaction of a man returning to familiar ground. Then he called the pharmacy himself. I sat across from him and listened while he gave the invoice number, the dates, and the amount. His voice was slower than it used to be, but it was his voice. Clear, irritated, exact. When the credit posted 3 days later, he printed that too. "See?" he said, sliding the page into the folder. "This is how money should move. Someone notices, someone asks, someone fixes it." It was such a small thing, $38.42. But after months of watching thousands disappear under the word gift, that tiny refund felt like Dad getting a piece of himself back. One Sunday, almost exactly a year after the first big transfer, Dad and I sat at the dining room table with tea. The plastic cover was still there. The brass letter opener was beside a stack of envelopes. Outside, Mrs. D'Souza was criticizing someone's hedge trimmer technique across the street. Dad opened his bank statement, checked the pension deposit, the aid payment, the pharmacy charge, and the restitution deposit from Nikhil's plan. He wrote a small check mark beside each one. Then he tapped the restitution line with his pen. "Dad wanted me to have it," he said. I looked up. He smiled, but it was not a happy smile. It was tired and sharp. "Now Dad wants it back." I laughed. He did too. Not because any of it was funny exactly. Because sometimes the only way to live with a betrayal is to let one clean sentence close the file. The last time I saw Nikhil in person was months later, at a cousin's wedding. He stood on the other side of the banquet hall, older, thinner, holding a glass of water. For a moment he looked like he might come over. Then Aunt Mina stepped between us accidentally, carrying a plate of appetizers, and the moment passed. Dad was beside me in his wheelchair because long distances had become harder. He saw Nikhil too. "Do you want to leave?" I asked. Dad shook his head. "No. The samosas are good." That was how I knew we were going to be okay. Not healed. Not the same. Just okay enough to stay at a wedding for good samosas and not let the person who hurt us decide when we left. If there is a lesson in what happened, it is not that every family argument should become a legal case. It is that love is not a record-keeping system. Trust is not an audit. And when someone starts moving money around a vulnerable person while saying, "Don't worry, it's family," that is exactly when the paperwork matters most. My brother thought Dad's confusion would hide the transfers. He thought the forged letters would make the theft look like generosity. He thought relatives would be easier to convince than investigators. For a while, he was right about the relatives. But the statements told the story he didn't want told. The access logs told it. The drafts told it. The neighbor with the open window told it. And in the end, Dad told it too, in his own voice, sitting across from the son who kept claiming to know what he wanted. He wanted his money protected. He wanted his care paid for. He wanted his daughter left alone. And he got all three.